Good morning, everybody. My name is Jennifer Wright. I'm part of the ACPE board for about 4 more hours. But I'm here just to introduce Tashawn to you so that we can get started, because what he has to say is way more interesting than what I have to say. So this is Tashawn Christie. He's with the Kent School District, and I think it's a really interesting topic that he's bringing forth around data, not so much about the actual data, but about the data culture, and how do you implement that in the district. So here's Tashawn.
Yeah. Thank you. So if you all don't mind humoring me for a second, I'm going to take a selfie with all of us in it, because I have to prove that I'm here. There's rumors that I'm in the Bahamas, so I just want to make sure that everyone's there. So, all right, on 3, I want everyone to give me their best peace sign and say, "Peace, suckers." All right, ready? On 3, 1, 2, 3. Peace, suckers. There we go. Yes. See, that's teamwork makes the dream work, right? All right, so glad that everyone's here. My voice is going out because I've been yelling for the last couple of days. I don't know why, but I've been yelling. So the session that you're in is you've got data, now what? Building data use through culture. So if this is not what you expected, I will not be offended for long if you get up and go. So welcome. Thank you. Yep. So thank you all for being here. A couple of things that I wanted to use as disclaimers up front. This is not a technical session. This has everything to do with culture, getting culture going, interactions, all those little things that happen over the course of a day, weeks, months, and years in order to make sure that you get in the direction of actually being able to use data in effective ways. Because I'm pretty sure that all of you have data initiatives to some extent. You're in and out of data, but you might not necessarily be using it to its best and most efficient way. So this is a session for that. It's interactive. You can ask questions as we go along. I'm not sure if I have enough material. I have 2,000 slides, so I'm going to try to get through them as fast as possible. No, I only have 100, huh? Yeah. So I've done the timing, and I have like 30 seconds for each slide, so I'm going to go through this as fast as possible. Okay? So here's our agenda. We have our intro. We're going to set some common ground so that we can all be on the same place and level set. Socializing success, because as some of you know, if you haven't socialized the idea behind your data system, behind all of your data systems, then there's a very good chance that it's not going to be successful. Rules and revelations, things that have been found out as I've walked through this journey for multiple years. I was first involved in data in the mid-90s. I did a lot of R-base and those type of things, some crystal reports at IBM, and just kind of moving along the timeline. There's been a lot of changes, and there's a lot of things that I've learned through trial and error. So I've made a bunch of mistakes so that you don't have to, and so you can thank me for it later. Empty promises and pitfalls, some of the things that you will run into as you go along this journey. I wanted to make sure that you were aware of those. And then we have a Q&R. I used to call that Q&A, but the answers that were given were usually wrong. So I'm just going to respond, and that's the most that I can. That's the most that I can promise you. So by the end of the session, my hope is, so this is the outcome slide. I just want to make sure that I had it up there, and this is what I named it. You will learn that a lot of the data challenges that you have are universal. We're all in the same boat, and we're all kind of working towards the same things. So just so that you understand that it's not just your system that has these problems, it's pretty much every system, unless the people are kind of doing it really, really well. And I only really know of a couple of school districts across the country that I've heard of that are doing it well. And we can talk about those a little bit later as well. That you can take some of the questions presented and turn them into data you can use to move your system forward. So turn data that you get into additional data, so metadata, right? Everything that you get from this session, everything that you get when you ask questions of your system, you can turn into data in order to inform your practice. And that should be how it always is as you move forward. And then find that data culture comes from a series of small steps practiced continuously so that they spread universally. In order to remove your data system, it is very important that you know that it is a daily, weekly, monthly thing. It can't just be this one time, hey, we did that data thing, didn't work, so we're going to try something else. That is not how it works. You have to set the course and then continue to move forward, right? So, intro. This is my obligatory numbers slide, just so that everyone knows kind of what our district is. The only things that I will point out here are schools. We have 28 elementary schools, 6 middle, 4 high, 3 academies, and 1 early learning school, 25,640 students. That number went down significantly in the last couple of years. There's some data behind why that is. Partially housing prices, as well as people getting moved out of urban areas and moving farther south in Washington, where we're at, out of Kent, Washington. Every time I see one of these obligatory number slides, I always think, well, what's missing? Like, what is that one thing that's missing? Can anyone tell me what's missing from this slide?
Kids.
Kids? 25,640. Staff? I normally don't include that, but that's a good one. Maybe I should put that next time. We have a lot of staff. A lot of is a technical term. So, anything else? Eligible for free and reduced lunch. So that's the one that people normally put on slides, but I'm going to talk a lot about narrative. I don't include that as part of our narrative because it isn't really relevant as part of this talk, right? So when I'm talking about our district in certain ways, this is part of the culture thing that we're talking about. I don't include free and reduced lunch because that really doesn't tell you a whole lot about who our kids are. It doesn't tell you a lot about our system. It only really tells you how many kids are, hungry within a certain degree of, or how many are potentially hungry or whatever the case might be. But there's a lot of baggage associated to free and reduced lunch, so I don't even include it. If you want to talk about what that is, then usually it's relative to E-rate and a few other things and programs and such, but I don't want our kids to be categorized in that way. And for you to look at us through that socialized lens of free and reduced lunch, that means this thing, so avoid it. Organizational effectiveness. So this is the team that I lead, right? We have our student learning is at the center of everything we do. And we support teachers who support student learning, and then administration and staff who also support that student learning. The reason that this is situated the way that it is because all of these teams work together to support what's at the center. So our data team, which is our data services team, this also includes our student information system team, as well as data warehouse and those type of things, data processes. Assessment, that's all of our interim assessments as well as our benchmark assessments, things like the SBA, all the national assessments, informative assessments as well. Research, we do program review. That's the business intelligence and analytics arm of my team here. And we do a lot of work with all of the departments and titles all together. Technology support, as well as infrastructure and customer support. And then strategy. Strategy is 2 different sections. One of the sections is our project management office, all right, innovation, strategy, and performance. So federal policies that impact education, federal policies that impact technology, all that is in there, as well as our digital learning and digital instruction. So technology integration and all those things are inside our strategy team. All those teams come together to use data in order to make our system better. So KSD data beliefs. I went to a session. We're really good friends with a lot of the districts that are around. We are pretty deep colleagues, and we spend a lot of time with them. What we realized when we met with the people at Renton School District, we have a couple of Renton people, and they start out every one of their data sessions with what their beliefs are about their data. And the reason that is because what they're doing is they're socializing their culture. They're telling you that this is what we believe about data, so if you see any data slides from us, you understand exactly what we're trying to communicate through that. So for ours, data is only as accurate as the processes that feed it. I'm going to talk a little bit later about processes and why they're so important to your data. More data can lead to better questions. So the more data that you have included, people can ask, well, wait a second, how does this associate to that thing, which associates to that thing? And that will help you to create data literacy across your system, which is just as important as having data. If people in your system are data literate from their lens and from where they stand, then it becomes a lot easier for us to move that through. Data is neutral. This means that data by itself does not judge, right? That's people that's doing the judgment based on what they see. So whenever we put out data, we're not trying to judge you. We don't put our dashboards together in ways that create that judgment. We just put the data out there, and then we explain, this is what we see. What do you see? That helps us to have some common ground whenever we're talking about data. Data use is not a one-time event. It's an ongoing and iterative process. We design all of our data systems to be ongoing. They update themselves, they refresh themselves, so that we don't get around this whole data summit kind of culture. where you have your data summits in the fall, you have your data summit in the spring, and in between, no one's really looking at data. They're just kind of, making educated guesses, and we're trying to get away from that. So if the data system is constantly available, then it doesn't become a one-time event. And then everyone is a data user. That's probably one of the most important things that you need to communicate if you're trying to create culture. If everyone understands where they sit in terms of creating data, consuming data, then it becomes part of every conversation. Someone will not come to you and say, we need to make these huge changes and not have a real reason for it or not have any data behind it. Everyone will understand what they do to contribute to the system. So we're going to set common ground. So to understand this session, this is a little bit of framing for you, just so you can understand where I'm coming from and you don't have any misconceptions about what I'm trying to tell you. Data is part of everyone's job. That's what we talked about earlier. An example would be, let's say that you're trying to get registration numbers, right? You want to figure out how many students registered during a certain amount of time. Whose responsibility that is in your system? Anyone can speak up. Who's responsible for registering students? Registrars, right? So what happens if your registrars don't have a process for entry, like timely entry? Never happens. But what if it happens if it happens once every 2 weeks, 3 weeks? How accurate do your projections come from? Because you're not necessarily sure about when and how, right? Yeah. Let's say human resources, right? When someone is onboarded, how long does it take for that entry to happen to it being in the system, and then all your automated systems take over that, right? Is that payroll run, all those things? Or when someone leaves your system, right? Part of everyone's job. So you can find pretty much everyone who is in any one of these roles, their data feeding the system, especially if they're in some type of support role, and how important it is. And that needs to be something that you talk about, right? That's what I'm talking about when I'm talking through everything here. I mean, assuming that data is part of everyone's job. The culture that's being described here is geared towards self-service. We're getting completely out of the practice of, hey, can you give me that report? We're getting towards we have all of our data. All of our data is curated. We have data dictionaries. We have synonyms for everything. So if you're calling something, we've standardized on what that looks like so that everyone can get to this point of the data that I need is over there. I can go grab it. I know how to put it together and create what I want. So keep that lens as we talk through our pieces. Iteration and ideation. We are constantly improving the system. That's why I say that you can't necessarily wait, or it's not a one-time event, because we will start out with this, and as we learn, we will figure more things out. Then the ideation part is we have a high level of empathy for our users, so we make sure we know who our users are. As we work through the processes and the systems, then we understand that we go from that sympathy to some brainstorming, and we end up with an end product that is way more informed than what we started before. Then we go back to the iteration. So this is not set in stone. We start our data system, we move on, we find some things out, we come back, we add that, and then we keep going. You can lead from where you are. That goes back to the data as part of everyone's job. Even if you're not the person who's directly responsible for data in your system, you can move this forward from where you are because you have part of the system in your job. I think there's probably a data element in pretty much everyone's job, but sometimes you have to look a little bit deeper to see it. And you can lead that from where you are. Part of it is how you practice, how you give, and how you receive data, and then some of the suggestions that you give. And inquiry-based. We focus heavily on questions, not on requests. So what data are you looking for? It needs to be tied to a question, not just, can I have this data? No, what question are you trying to answer? Because once you get to that place, then it makes people really think hard about what they're asking you for and what their expected outcome is. So everything we're going to talk about from this point on should be seen through this lens. And raise your hand if you have questions as we go along. So if you don't know how to ask the right question, you discover nothing. I strongly believe this. And this is what we are focusing on when I was talking a little bit just a second ago about questions and question answering. We want to get to this level of discovery that really digs deep into what is our expected outcome. Because the purpose of a school district is to make sure that students get to that place that they want to be, right? We get them through our system, and then they're capable and prepared. So knowing that, do the questions tie to that in some way, right? Or is it just I'm trying to find out some interesting facts? We need to get interesting out of our vocabulary in a certain way and get to this really actionable place. So, if you have a device, if you can do me a favor, go to menti.com, enter this code, and there should be a question that's already there. And it talks about data, people, and structures. So I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to start this, and then I'll show you what the results are. No, it is kind of a trick question. I'm going to tax you mentally. You know, some of you were out late last night. I saw you. All right, does anyone still need this up? Oops. Thomas. I know. I have a Thomas job description in my edition as well. So yeah, this is kind of a tricky question because I asked that, what is the title of your primary data person? So this can mean a lot of things depending on where you are as a district. Your primary data person can be the person who puts together most of the things, or who your primary user is. But again, the answer that you gave to this question is really strongly tied to how you see your data culture, right? So if your assistant superintendent is your primary data person, I would probably say that your assistant superintendent isn't making a lot of reports unless they are, right? Who put that up, and are they the person that's creating most of your reports? See, no one wants to admit it, huh? Like, that's a trick question. I don't think that's supposed to be happening. No. So, superintendent, assessment coordinator. In a lot of districts, your assessment coordinator also is responsible for research. So I can see that one being the case. Data specialists, everyone, all of us. I like that person. That's probably somebody that I planted in the group who answered that one. I appreciate that. Yeah, back to Thomas. Data analysts. We have a couple data analysts. Some data dogs, yes. I hope you have t-shirts for those people because that's how you motivate them, definitely. So thank you. So we have our, you're the data dog. Next question, what is the level of data use adoption in your district? So we go from 0, low adoption, medium adoption, few dashboards, limited users, and high adoption, full end-to-end user self-service. So it seems that a majority of us are at medium adoption. Yeah. Yeah, it would seem that way. Wow, high adoption, full in. That's hopefully our district. I'm saying. That's our data. See, that was a trick. That was really a trick question. So I do have one person here from my district. I'm hoping that's what. Don't tell me if it wasn't, but yeah, that's. So most people will call themselves in this medium adoption layer just because you have few dashboards, right? Limited users. You put dashboards out there. You're not necessarily sure if people are actually looking at them. You hope they are. You hope the data is actionable. At times, when you have the low adoption, most of the ad hoc reports, you have Excel in your system, and most of your reports go out in Excel. You have a few pivot tables maybe, and you have to spend a lot of time modifying those pivot tables. And then high adoption. Full end-to-end user self-service. This is where we want to get through. Again, this is what we put as our lens. We're constantly moving forward, and sometimes we're there, but then something happens to make us take a couple steps back because we've released something into our environment. Then there's high levels of pushback because they're not used to seeing it that way, and so we try to, again, socialize our ideas. So thank you, and one last one for this segment. Are you the main person responsible for data in your organization? Just so I can get more of a feel of the room and figure out how to frame the rest of this. Excellent. All right. So now I know I am speaking to the rest of the masses. I appreciate this. Main person responsible for data in your organization. Well, thank you. So can we agree? Can we agree that every school system has large amounts of data? Can we agree with that?
Yes.
Yes? No? Some people are like, dude, whatever. So, okay. What's the data? No, what's the data system? Every school system has a large number of questions. Every school system has a large number of questions that can be answered with their available data. Does everyone agree that that is the case? Yes. Right? So can we also agree that our job is to make sure that data is available, right? Who can access what and when? Can we agree on that? Yes. Our job is to make sure that data is accurate. How often is the data verified, right? How often is it, all the processes that feed it verified? Actionable. This is where, this is even in black for a reason. Actionable normally happens is, again, we get from informationally available to I can actually do something with it, which is a step. What does this data allow the audience to do? There needs to be this constant review of what that is. And then secure. Who can see the what? I'm going to get past that because I shouldn't have said that extra then there. So socializing success. I'm going to let you into what the secret sauce is to making a lot of this stuff work. It's something that some of you have in varying different degrees in your districts and in your systems. But this to me is probably the most important way in order to change it from where you are right now, wherever that is, to having a really strong data culture. And this is your data team. So the data team, depending on where your district is, can be a lot of different people. But the reason I'm going to focus on this for a little while is because if you don't have one, it's probably a good idea to build this team up. So our data team makeup. Usually the data team is full of people all across your system. And the way that you determine who's on your data team are who are your district data people. So when I say data people, if you're the person who receives requests, like if you're a help desk person or ask your help desk, who do you get the most requests for data from? There's usually like 2 or 3 people who are those people, who they always ask those questions. They are always the first to find that there's an error. They're always the ones who can point out regulations, rules. They're the person who seems to know the Cedars manual back and forth, right? But don't even work in your data team directly, but they just happen to know that because that's their world. That person should be on your data team. The other people are whoever's responsible for your SIS. Someone from that team should be on your data team. If you have people who live in some of these other groups who are high-level data consumers, like inclusive ed, someone from your inclusive ed team should be on your data team. Someone from your technology team should be on your data team. Someone from teaching and learning, regardless of what area, regardless of what content area, should be on your should be on your data team. And again, you're looking for people who have an interest in data, who use data in some kind of way, and sometimes the way that you find these people is just through socialization, just through talking, just through people who ask you, and so I've been trying to get this report to run in your system and I can't. Those are the people that you want to have on this team. Who do most of your data requests come from? Again, we talked about that. And who do you never hear from? So this one is a little bit tricky. You want to have at least one of these people on your data team. Why? Because they're the person that can break things, right? The person that you never hear from is either creating all reports by themselves, they have their side system, and they don't want to have anything to do with you. Or, and no one has the side system person. You can probably name them, right? You know the spreadsheet I'm talking about, where it's stored, and you've been tempted to delete it several times. Or is that just me?
No.
Okay. Because I think about that all the time. Yeah. So you want to know where Joe's spreadsheet is, right? And then how you involve that into the system. Joe's the person that you want on this team because he can be a critical ally, or he can be the person who pushes the team forward because he's asking the questions that everyone really wants to know. So why would you want a data team? So data is complex. We all know that there's data that we're not necessarily familiar with, even if we're the primary data people in our system, right? We aren't the experts at teaching and learning data. We aren't the experts at the inclusive data, the operational data, any of those pieces. So if we include those people into the system, then it's very easy for us to hear all those perspectives and have different lenses on the data that we have. Data is dirty. Data is the dirtiest thing ever. I feel like washing my hands after seeing some of these spreadsheets I get that come across my desk sometimes. It is crazy how you have the wrong fields in places, how you have the wrong naming conventions, how something will be named 5 different ways, and sometimes that messes you up. Ownership is vague at times. So you'll ask the question, who owns what data, right? Is that familiar to anyone? Yeah. Who owns that thing? That data that we have in our system, who asked for that field to be in Skyward or whatever system that you have? And what does this actually answer? It's a yes/no field. What does that really do for you, right? So ownership is vague at times. Who owns that, and what was the purpose of putting it in there? Because maybe it's the most important data we have, right? Ownership is vague, so if you have someone in the data team that might have that lens or a relationship to the person that has that lens, they can get that answer for you. Process can be a little bit shaky, and so we're going to talk a little bit deeper about process, so we'll get into some of that, but process informs data. Helps in breaking down silos. So if you have people on your data team that live in these other places, they have an in to the data that belongs to that team. So you can bring them into the conversation to say that, you know what, a principal came to me and asked me this question about dual language enrollment, at these 7 schools. We don't have that in our system right now. Can you help me with that? Oh, well, why were they asking the question? Well, I thought you would know, but since you don't, the reason they were asking that question is because they told us that they want to figure out what their enrollment pattern is going to be like potentially next year based on feeder schools. So we're trying to figure all that out. They can ask additional questions. They can find out from their lens, right, why the question is being answered. And plus, it also helps them in their daily work because they'll start to ask more questions. And then when they're sitting with you, they can help you to figure out where that lives. So a few things that team does: data set creation, data source validation, dashboard creation, and quality assurance. All these things are primary focus for the data team. They do a lot more, which we'll talk about again a little bit later. But we want to make sure that at the very least they're focusing on these pieces. So data set creation. Does everyone know what that is? Yes? No? Okay, data set creation. So let's say that in order to have an attendance data set, what are some of the things you think should be in an attendance data set? Anyone? Attendance? Present. Okay. Present, right? Enrolled, right? Date ranges, all those types of things. And so your data team looks at your data set for a specific topic, like attendance, behavior, what those things are, and make sure that in order to answer the questions that you have, all those pieces are included, right? So we create data sets that are available to our system. Because again, back to our original lens, we're trying to create this self-service. So in order to get to self-service, your data has to be as clean as possible, because if it's not, then no one will ever be able to answer their questions, right? Data source validation. So now that you've created these data sources, right, you have to make sure that they're valid in order to answer the questions that you have, or to make sure that the data is fresh and all those other things. So we have to make sure that that happens. Dashboard creation. So the data team can influence dashboard creation, because again, the way that we create all of our dashboards at Kent is every dashboard is associated to a key question. So one of our key questions that we ask in our discipline dashboard is, are students receiving discipline? What is the measure of students receiving discipline in these areas, right? Or are our students proportionate in discipline by race, right? Very direct questions. So that when I look at this, I know exactly what question it's trying to answer. I can find more things out about it, but so as we walk through this step, we want to make sure that we create dashboards that are aligned to the fact that they're validated. Plus, we have all these other lenses. And then quality assurance. No matter how many times you look at a dashboard, the only time you find out something went wrong is when you release it. It's funny, you could have 100 people look at that thing. The day you put it out, hey, everything's misspelled, right? You're like, wait a second, I looked at that thing for 30 hours. So, yeah, exactly. Why? Yeah, so all of that. So, one more. Oops, not what I wanted to do. One more. Do you have a data team as described in the presentation? I know, yes. Excellent. Excellent, excellent. Wow. All right, so real quick, the people who said yes, what does your data team look like, real quick? Anyone? Yes.
It's mainly set up around student data right now, but we have people from teaching and learning, our data and assessment, technology.
Excellent.
We have kind of 2 or 3 different data teams depending on the data set. So we have a student data set team and a staff data set team and then a facilities data set team. And I'm not sure, we haven't actually dubbed them teams, but they exist.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. For sure. Yes.
We've got a data warehouse, so we have an architect there, then we've got the accountability research and assessment, and also interfaces with them that design the tools.
Excellent. Excellent. Anyone else? So out of all the people that said no, right, is it a matter of it not being important, or a matter of you didn't know, or a matter of we just are where we are? No, yes. You can popcorn that. You can just say yes, no, whatever.
It's for us. It's we have elements of all the things you listed. They're not in a cohesive team. So it's, but I wouldn't call them. If you had to say, do we have dashboards on specific topics? Yes, but it's not as clear as it could be.
Yeah.
So we don't have a focus.
Yeah.
On like a whole team that says this data is our job.
Yeah.
A lot of those questions come to the SIS group, and
Yeah.
then we engage assessment and we engage different people to make sure.
Yeah.
But it's just not as clean.
So I'm glad you said that, because so when I describe a data team, I'm not talking about people whose full-time FTE is data team. That's not it. Just because I'm calling them a team does not necessarily mean that this is all that they do, because this is not all we want them to do. We want them to be involved in their daily practice. We want them being part of the team to influence some of their work and vice versa. So this is really, really informal. I think because of where I sit in our district, I'm able to go cross team, because this is actually, I call it a cross-departmental data team. And the reason being is because I reach out to some of these team leaders. So I reach out to the head of our inclusive ed to say that, hey, I need somebody from your team because this is what we're trying to do. I reach out to someone from operations and say, hey, so your data is just as important as the rest of this data, so I need to help with you with your data practices. We need to figure out how these bus routes impact student outcomes. So I need your data, right? Go talk to our nutrition people to say that, all right, some of our students aren't necessarily getting through lines, they aren't eating, do we have any of that data around so that we can include that in our set? So it's a really informal team, and if you can socialize the idea of the necessity, you can probably squeeze an hour every couple of weeks for this team to come together and talk about some of this stuff. So it doesn't have to be formal, right? And there is an hour somewhere every couple of weeks to talk about this, because once it becomes everyone's job and key to making sure that we have high-level student outcomes, then it becomes more important in everyone's mind. All right, so how do I build one? So this is for that 63%, and then the 40% of that 63% who think is important. Look for the data people in your organization. I described who those people were. So hopefully you can find those people and really include them into your work. Who asks for it, uses data the most, and who do they interact with? So it's not just the askers, but who are they on teams with? And then who do they deliver their data to, right? We need to figure that out, and then figure out what all the connections are, and then draw a mental map for that. So bonus. This is our bonus round. I wanted to include a couple bonus things. Sponsorship. Sponsorship is key, because if you can get a sponsor, then it's easy to create this informal team, because you have someone who is able to speak to the team's mission. So sponsorship. Sponsors are necessary because you will run into silos. If I go to the operations team and say that, hey, we want to get your work ticket data so that we can figure out whether or not every time the air conditioner blows in this building or the heater blows in this building, it drops student achievement by 80%. we kind of want to know that, right? So that we can figure out whether or not it makes more sense for us to invest ahead of time into these systems or change maintenance schedules so they don't go down during these certain times where they do, right? So that we can get all that data, because it's important, right? And if you run into that silo, if you have a sponsor, your sponsor can speak directly to, or they can have those higher level conversations if they need to. Sponsor can communicate the purpose of the work when you or your team are not in the room. So if you've done a good job, your sponsor knows what you're trying to accomplish. When you're not around, your sponsor is the person who's talking about your work. That is as impactful as anything, because when you talk about something, people will look at you from whatever lens they see you as and say that, well, you're part of the data team, you're the data guy, so I know that this is important to you, right? But to hear someone else say, hey, this is important to me too, but for these reasons, then it has as much an impact as any other information that you can give. Sponsors help to justify the cost of your work. Data initiatives usually start out really strong until you tell somebody how much a data warehouse costs. Then it will slow down. I guarantee you it'll slow down, right? But if you can explain it well enough to where, and put it in terms to where your sponsor has a good narrative in order to give to people, then it will help to justify the cost. I can guarantee that. And then aim for the stars. Go as high as you can to find your sponsor. If you can make your superintendent your sponsor, then you have nothing to worry about, right? If you can sit down and say, hey, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, this is aligned to your goals, right? Then it makes it a lot easier so that later on when you're talking about it, they can socialize it during, whatever executive cabinet or during cabinet, and they can talk about this is what we're trying to accomplish as a team. This is the person that I have leading it, so if he's in your space or she's in your space, understand that it's important to me and it's important to the system, right? So it starts to make sense. So this is how you prep your sponsor. You communicate to them that you need them to be the visible sponsor of change. You need them to be visible about it. So it's not just that you're a sponsor, you get the t-shirt and the coffee mug. You need to be able to speak to some of this stuff. So I'm going to give you a few talking points and help you to understand exactly what we're trying to accomplish. Make the data processes, challenges, and potential victories tangible for them. So help them to understand that at a core level, we won't get too deep into the woods, but I want you to understand how that 2-week lag for HR data being entered into our system really impacts our work, right? Really impacts the fact that we are hiring superstar people, but they can't be onboarded right because they can't access their email for a week, or they aren't in the right distribution groups, or they can't have access to buildings, or whatever the case might be for a week. So we're losing them at the very beginning because of this. So once you explain that to someone, they're like, oh yeah, I get that. That makes sense to me, right? Create a through line between your narrative and their purpose. We're going to talk a little bit about narratives a little bit later, but if you can help them to understand where your narrative is connected and what their purpose, right, or agenda is, then you can help them to understand why this is valuable. Originally, I titled this as the what's in it for them, but that felt a little too salesy. So this is the tying through line to agenda. And then communicate urgency for change. In the Cotter book that my friend Matt gave me, creating the urgency for change is like the first step in creating this big change system. So if you can create the urgency, communicate the urgency, then that person communicates the urgency, then it becomes part of your system, your data culture, right? So, double bonus, your narrative. I talked a little bit about the narrative just a second ago. So, what's a narrative? I'm going to give an example of a narrative, but I'm going to give you just a brief example. So let's say your data team is responsible for building these dashboards, right? If you say that our narrative is we create data systems in order for educators to have the information that they need at their fingertips so that they can do these things, right? And make it as clear and clean as that. I know it sounds like a slogan or a motto or that type of thing, but having a very clear narrative of what you're trying to accomplish makes it very easy to where that's what you say all the time. People hear that. They can repeat it back to you. Then you don't have to say it anymore, right? And that's the reason that you need one. Additionally, internally, it guides your work. So if you ever start to veer from what you're doing, you can always go back to your narrative and say, wait a second, no, that isn't what we decided to do. We didn't decide to do all these other things, create these super fancy dashboards that don't really tell anyone anything. No, we have a very specific purpose. Sets our parameters, communicates our purpose, and then allows non-technical, non-data people to participate, and so they can see their entry points. So they can tie their own personal mission to your narrative and say that, hey, this is exactly what I'm trying to do as well. So let me onboard into that. Let me get that into my mind, and now I'm a data person. I feel like I'm going too fast. So this is a narrative example. This is from my research team. I know it's really super small. I apologize about that, but I'm going to read it for the people in the back in case they can't see it. The KSD research team creates and maintains an iterative data visualization system to support district performance and student learning. In addition, we help to build a culture of data literacy, question asking, and accountability that will disrupt the status quo and ultimately improve student outcomes. So I pushed for a little bit edgy narrative, right? That whole disrupt the status quo. I wanted to get people prepared for the fact that we're going to put data out there. It might not be pretty, it might not paint a good picture, but at least it tells us where we are. So understand that if we're asking you very direct questions about this data, then that means that we're not passing any judgment, but this is our reality. Back to that whole snapshot thing, right? And so underneath it kind of describes, what they're primarily responsible for. This is on our website if you want to see a bigger version as well underneath the research team. So rules and revelations. We're going to talk about a couple different things here, but again, there's rules associated with data. Everyone knows that. I think the big thing that we have to understand is that those rules don't necessarily need to be restrictive. So, rules and revelations. So there was something I was thinking about that I wasn't necessarily sure I wanted to talk to you all about because it is a little bit embarrassing. But everyone does it. Everyone at least is supposed to do it in their systems, right? But not everyone does it. But I'm not going to call anyone out because I know some of you are doing this, but some of you are not doing it well, right? But I wanted to make sure that we at least talked about it. And that's governance. I see. That's exactly it. Governance. I'm sorry I had to bring it up, right? The reason I have to bring up governance is because it's one of those things to where if you do right, no one ever sees it, right? But if you do it wrong, it turns into that, oh my goodness, we have to slog our way through that governance thing. So people hear this lack of practice. They hear documentation, rules, and restraint whenever you describe governance. So it's very, very important that when you're talking to your teams about this, when you're talking to the system about this, that you help them to understand that the reason the governance is in place is because treat this big school system like a sports car, right? We can go as fast as we want to go, right? But we have to have a way to slow down when we need to. We have to have a way to slow down when we need to. So we need a combination of a steering wheel and a brakes. What the governance does is it gives us our steering wheel and our brakes. So here's the state definition, or one of those regional definitions. So overall management, usability, security, right? Those are the things that people normally think about when they think about data and data governance. It's funny that, again, the initial response whenever we talk about governance is that. There are people who are like, all right, we need to have this governance council who's 8 people, and it needs to be our legal council, and we need to make sure that we're not doing all these things with FERPA. If you ever want to have a long discussion with me, we'll talk about FERPA. But if that can't be about FERPA, all these things that we need to do to protect data, and I get that, right? But at the same time, internally, right, this information is necessary in order to get to whatever we've named in our narrative. We have to do these high-level student outcomes, right? So our governance can't be as restrictive as it has been or has been implemented. There's this really good book called Non-Invasive Data Governance that I highly recommend. Non-invasive data governance. So, can governance be a good thing? Yes, if it's flexible and iterative to achieve rapid delivery. If your governance system adds an extra 2, 3, 4 weeks to something being delivered, then you probably need to think about what you're really trying to accomplish with your governance. Is it about control? Or is it about making sure that you're creating something that actually feeds and helps and fosters the system that keeps you out of trouble? Right? But that also helps the system move forward. User-informed to create coherence. Your governance can be user-informed because everyone wants the same result, but sometimes it's putting it into language that everyone understands in order to help you to move forward. Used to move the system towards greater adoption and actionable insight. So the governance isn't just about rules. It needs to also be about having greater adoption. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a second, and the actionable insight piece. So it isn't just, again, to be interesting or to give information. It needs to be action associated. So your governance should also make sure that it fosters that. So we need to use governance as a tool rather than as a restriction. Okay? Use governance as a tool rather than as a restriction. So the products of governance that we have specifically is we have a style guide. Our style guide goes through how every dashboard we create needs to be situated, right? Where things are, where the logo is, where the filters should be, colors and all that other stuff, because we want to make sure that we're covering everything from inclusivity to the fact that the PD is embedded, right? Because think about this. If your governance model matches or makes sense, I got the same socks. If your governance model matches and makes sense, then your PD is greatly reduced because your dashboards kind of look alike, right? People don't have to learn something every single time that they go to one of your dashboards. They know that at the very top are my filters, because that's the way we have ours set. Very top of the filters, our filters look this way, parameters look a certain way, and this is an example of a page out of our governance, out of our style guide, excuse me. And then we create data dictionaries so that people understand that attendance means this, right? Locally, when we talk about attendance, student means this, entity means this, right? Attendance means this, discipline means this, behavior means this, and what are some of the synonyms? We include all of that. The reason being is because, again, since we're trying to get to this self-service model, if we don't do a good job of defining what those things are, then we haven't created this space for people to be able to create their own thing because they can't enter into our system. We've kept all the information locked down to just our data team, and only our data team knows how to use it. We don't want that. We want everyone to be able to integrate, understand what the system is, and be able to move us forward. So, empty promises and potential pitfalls. I am going fast. Empty promises and potential pitfalls. So, all that glitters. This is my snake oil salesman, all right? So, are there any vendors in the room? I apologize ahead of time. I'm sorry. But I'm going in. No, I'm just joking. So, every time that I sit down across the table from someone who's selling a data product, these are the things that I hear. All you have to do is load your data. It's going to work. I guarantee you. Go to my website. We've got the CSV templates, a bunch of columns. We got you, right? That's what I hear. Or we're currently working on an API, data tool, automated reporting, etc. Right? Does that sound familiar to anyone?
Yes.
Our report writer module can meet all of your needs, right? We hear all of those things. Oh, see, you never heard that before. We integrate with your SIS. This is my favorite one. We integrate with your SIS. I'm like, sure you do, right? The reason that I point this out is because everyone hears these same things, but what they don't necessarily realize is that there's a lot that goes into a data system, right? And the fact that all of our data is dirty, like we said before, the reason we have a data team, means that once we hear these things, we have to look at them skeptically. We also have to socialize the fact that with our leadership, as well as with the people that we work with, if you're sitting down with someone who is a data vendor, because what will happen is you'll have a superintendent or a chief accountability officer that will go to a nice conference. They'll sit down with someone, and they'll say one of these 4 things. They'll come back to you and say, hey, have you ever seen blah? I'm not going to name any names. I have like 15 of them in my head, but or they already purchased it. Well, the good thing is do I have sign off for that? I think I might have sign off for that. I might have included that somewhere in my contract. But anyway, so keeps the hair on my head. So yeah, so they come back, they've either decided to purchase something or they want to purchase something. And the good news is that in our district, we actually have a software review process to where before we purchase, we have to go through everything. And we tied it to accessibility, which is kind of the key because per our district policy, the software that we buy has to be accessible, especially if it's going to be district use. So it gives us the opportunity to review, which is brilliant. I think you did that, right? Yeah, see, thank you. So it's a beautiful thing. And so with that, you'll get someone to come back to you and saying all these things. And so you have to help them to say that, yes, you hear all that, but there's a lot more that goes into it. So why does it sound so good? We all have the same basic data needs. We do. Everyone in this room has probably, like I said, heard those things because those are the things that you're really trying to solve. How do I get data across systems easily? How do I get reports out to people easily? All those things. Data work is complex, lots of moving parts. And so if you can offload some of that, right, then you will take advantage of it, especially if it's affordable. You want it to be true due to timelines and the need for the work to be done. Someone delivers a very, very high level promise of, yes, we can get that done, right? And you want to believe them, but data is the brand new hotness. Everybody wants to be in this data field. I mean, the most random applications will, when I'm sitting across the table, they're like, oh yeah, by the way, we have a dashboard. I'm like, why do you have a dashboard? You don't even need one, right? But yeah, we have a dashboard. Can I get data out of your dashboard in an easy way? Oh yeah, yeah. So I always, with a grain of salt, I always listen to that and go, yeah, maybe not. But everybody wants to be in the system. There's a lot of money in data, and there's a lot of money in data prep. There's a lot of money in data reporting, and there's a lot of money in niche products, but very few actual solutions. People are selling a bunch of data products, but very few of them are selling an actual end-to-end solution that'll help you do everything that you need to do. So keep in mind, your data must be clean in order to utilize most external tools. It has to be clean, because if not, then all you're getting is bad results from bad data, right? Most current data processes involve manual cleaning. So depending on whether or not you're starting from where you are and moving forward, or if you want to take all your legacy data, that's going to have to be cleaned in some way. So if someone says, oh yeah, all your data from the last 15 years, you'd be like, nah, 12 years ago, Joe was working on the data and Joe was tripping, right? So we know that. So we need to make sure that we step back from that, and we know that there's going to be some manual cleaning. Your data questions are nuanced based on your current culture. So depending on your system, you ask different data questions. So if someone says we have this one size fits all, then you really have to say, okay, so we have this question that we know that other districts might or might not have. Does your system answer this out of the box? If they say no, then time to keep it moving. Then if it was already that clean, you could do this work yourself. So understand that if you're going to go through the work of cleaning your data, then you can very easily just do a lot of this work yourself depending on your tool. So another bonus, data cleaning hack. I'm going to tell you the secret. This is not going to be secret any longer, because once I tell you, the world will know. Process review. That is your data cleaning hack. Now, this is one of those places to where silos definitely exist, and there will be a protective mindset around processes. That's why we talked about sponsorship before this. Because if you've already established a sponsor, then once you get into this process review stage, right? So I'm sorry I keep picking on HR. Hopefully there are no HR people in the room. But sorry I keep picking on HR, but this is an example. And not that this is happening, but this is an example. Let's say that we're trying to figure out how many employees that we have that are certified or, what's the word I'm looking for? Say again? No, not highly qualified. License? No, they have science, math, endorsed. Thank you. How many endorsements we have at individual buildings so that we can determine whether or not we can move people around in a way that makes sense, right? So according to master schedule and such. So if you ask that question, is it your district's process to include all the endorsement material in your student information system? Where does that live, right? So once you dig through the process, you try to ask the question of how does data enter the system? Who puts data into the system, and what system are they putting it into? Do you require them to put it into your student information system, or is their system Excel, right? Because it could be Excel. And if it's Excel, maybe it should go somewhere else, but have you built what needs to be built in there? So as you walk through it, does your processes create accurate data? Let's say you've walked through the whole process and there's step 5 that says that, okay, when you get to this step, you go out to zipcode.com and you verify the zip code. Are we sure that zipcode.com has the right zip codes? Have been updated recently, right? After you look through your process, you determine whether or not these things make sense. Does your process create usable data? Are you just collecting things to be collecting them because you have been collecting them because you used to have a paper form and you turned that paper form into a digital form, but the paper form was 40 years old, so you're getting people's beeper numbers, right? What do you need beeper numbers for, right? You're just trying to think through all the other things that you have and you need. And then what do your validation processes look like? So as we go through our process and our process map, we understand that step A, step B, step C, this is our current state. And then we go back with recommendation of, now that we have your current state, this is what best practice says, and this is what you should be doing in order to inform and feed the system. Then going from that point on, you should have cleaner data and can answer some of those questions that your system asks. So process example, how many students ride the school bus? if I was to ask any of you if you can answer this question, you think this is a simple question, right? But how many students ride the school bus, right? I think this is something that we kind of should know maybe, but right, we can make estimated guesses. I've been at board meetings, in past lives where I've heard people say a specific number. I'm like, whoa, you guys are, so anyway, right? So here's some of the questions that I would ask when someone says, these are some of the follow-up questions. So do drivers count students? That's the first question I would ask. It's yes, no, maybe do they have one of those little clicker things as people come in, right? And if they do count students, is that going to cost you extra money because it needs to be bargained? Question. Are the counts collected from drivers? So yes, they might be collecting them, but are they actually writing them down somewhere? Or are they putting them into a system? Right? Where are those counts stored? That's back to that original question. So as we walk through things, the data entry process, the last question in there is, does the data entry process provide the data that answers the questions generated by your system? So again, hack, very useful, process review. The people who do process review are normally, people in that analyst role. So if you have data analysts, they can do process review. If you have business analysts, they can do that process review, right? But any of your analysts, any of your business analyst type people should be able to walk through the process review. So if you need steps on the process review methodology, I'm sure that there are a lot out there, right? Everything from Six Sigma to a couple other ways to get this thing done. So, in summary, got there quick. In summary, lead from where you are. It is very important to understand that every single person in your system is a data person. So you have to lead this work from where you stand. Inquiry is important. Make sure that you're asking a lot of questions of your system, collecting it as data and using that to iterate on your process. Data teams leverage the vision and connect the system. Data teams leverage the vision of what you're trying to do with data so that you can connect those system pieces of what you're trying to accomplish. Sponsors are a key part of your initiative. Make sure that you have sponsors who understand the work, that you prep your sponsors properly, and that you give them everything they need to be successful, which helps your data team to be successful. Pay attention to your narrative. Create a narrative that describes specifically the work that you're trying to do and answers the questions that you need answered when you're not in the room. Governance can be fun. Governance is a wonderful thing if you use it as a tool. If you use it as a restriction, nobody will want to do it. Then you will have the wild, wild west. You'll have Excel spreadsheets all over the place. You might have a few Access databases and Google Sheets and Google data sheets collecting all your response to interventions. And yeah, no, I know that doesn't apply. But watch out for that. And then clean data is useful data, right? If you have clean data, that means that you can use that to inform, right, to make it actionable, because once your data is clean, you can act on it immediately rather than second guessing whether or not you trust it. And accurate processes equal clean data. That is very, very important. If you have your accurate processes together, you will have clean data. That clean data will be able to feed the system. So as I've kind of walked through this journey over a lot of years, what I realized is that at first what I was trying to do was just create dashboards, really. Trying to make dashboards that helped individuals kind of move forward in their journey. But what started to happen is the more questions I asked as I was trying to answer someone's question was that I'm not even necessarily sure that I know what your question is. So let me take a step back, figure out if I can answer your question. But then that got me a little bit deeper into, wow, okay, I answered your question, but you have more questions that makes me ask the system, right? So as I was searching for this one thing, I realized that the whole process of searching for it became more and more valuable. So hopefully this gave you something to start with at the very least. Hopefully you were able to identify two pieces of this. And if there are any questions. Yes?
Could you back up a little bit on process review? I'm a little confused about exactly what is the purpose of process review? Is this just to ensure that you have clean data?
Yes, process review is to ensure that you have clean data and that you have the right people entering the things in the right places.
Okay.
Yeah, to have exactly accurate data. So to have clean and accurate data, because those are two different things. Because you can have pristine data that does absolutely nothing for your system.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
What do you use as a delivery system for staff to get the access to the data, and how do you limit what they can see based on role?
So we use Tableau. as a system. And what we do is we have role-based, based on, department, based on role, also based on job description at times. And at the building level, we can tie buildings to rosters so that we can make sure that, a teacher will have access to this, theirs. We haven't released the teachers yet. We've gotten down to counselors because we figure once we get this refined, then, teachers will be our last little step. But counselors only have what their caseload is, right? A principal will have their own little school. Right, school leader. So the people who are the principals, supervisors, will have access to all their schools. That whole thing.
Do you straight in Tableau server, or do you have like a portal that they see that?
Tableau server. Yep. Yes.
Do you have a process for cost estimating? Like this right here, that process that you have with the buses?
Oh yeah.
Is something that doesn't exist, and yet somebody's asking this question. We need to build a system to collect this data so we can answer your question. How much is that going to cost? Do you have a system for analyzing that cost?
So that's a good question. The way that I look at systems, because obviously being part of technology and technology leadership for a long time, I tried to build the system with this in mind so that we know that the systems that we already have can accommodate that. Because what you just described can be easily done in SharePoint. It can be very easily done. It can be done in a Power App, with Flow and someone's phone. It can be done in the systems that you already have if you subscribe to that, right?
Well, but there's cost in collecting the clicker, or even getting the clicker, and/or training your buses, drivers on. I mean, there's a lot of hidden costs to the data collection process.
So once we walk through these steps, then we'll get to the point to where, all right, so this needs to happen if your drivers need to count. And that's why I mentioned the fact that does this need to be bargained, right? Because at the point we'll talk through, all right, this is what you need in order to answer your question, all right? And then we can help you with that piece. This is what we have available as far as tools. This is how much time we think approximately, and then it becomes a project.
Yeah, if I may add to that, that's really where my team comes in as part of the project management office. We're kind of a solutions broker in that regard.
Yeah. And this is Joel Bayerano. This is my assistant director, lead project manager, as well as every other single thing in the district. But can't have her. Sorry. Yes. Oh, Matt.
Just a question for you. What does this look like? Your data team in a smaller organization? What is that?
So you probably have your builder, your sponsor, and then someone who deals with whoever your current stakeholder or data consumers are. And I would start with those. But then include people from the groups, like have maybe a teacher, right? Especially in a smaller organization, because teachers wear as many hats as they wear in large districts, they wear many more in smaller. But the good news is that since you have so many people with so many hats, is that they can bring all those lenses to the team. So even if it's a small team, it's the equivalent of 5, 7, whatever the case might be.
You can template basically and then just apply that to all the other schools.
Yeah, definitely, yes.
You mentioned earlier with roles and permissions based on roles, and are you getting those roles from your employee management system usually? And did you have any problems with those titles not matching up with the role that they needed for their access? Because that's something that
no, our data is clean, so I don't know what you're talking about. We I get it. Yes, we so what happens is we apply the same process. Yeah. So if we're trying to assign roles, then we go back to our our ERP system to say that, all right, so we're trying to do this with your data, but your data is not clean. So here's the changes that we can probably make, and it'll help the whole system.
Yeah.
And so we definitely the process.
Through that process of getting that buy-in.
We continuously go through this process to go to buy-in.
Culture, yeah.
Exactly, because as more questions come up and as more of these use cases come up, we find out the people that we need to work with in order to move things forward. So, yeah. Yes.
Can you give me an example of a sponsor?
A sponsor. So in our district, it's the chief accountability officer and the superintendent. So I sit down with the superintendent every couple of weeks and talk through our data work, because he has specifically said that in order for us to figure out how to be equitable as a system, we have to know where every student is, right, on their journey to get to where they need to be, right? So this is important. So I tied what we're trying to do to that. And so he's extremely interested. He sponsors, supports, right, and wants to move us forward. Because when I told him I was doing this talk, he even said that, well, maybe we can do the same talk with our, with our school board and with other people, so that they can understand what we're doing as a system, so that we can socialize this idea of building data culture. Yes.
What's your scope of self-service?
right now.
Your whatever your, because you said that was a goal, was to make this thing be self-service, and I'm trying to understand what the scope is and who that means. Like, are you going to have teachers putting data together? Is the specific staff putting data together? Do you expect them to use the data dictionary?
So we chose Tableau Server for a couple of different reasons. One is because we can put things out and then do some of that permissions type things and have everyone see the same thing and it refreshes itself. But additionally, there's functions in there to where people can do their own web authoring. So we have a curated data source that we're working on in several different places where it blends attendance and demographic or whatever the case might be, so that based on your permissions, you can log in and create whatever you need to create on the server and then save it as your own thing. So we're doing a combination of consumption and creation. And we're really working towards making that kind of our standard. So the reason that we're really working strong towards this data use piece is that we really want people to understand what our data system is, what our narrative is, what we're trying to create, and how that can support what they're trying to do. Then that creates interest. Then we have professional learning opportunities for how to use the system, and then onboard people into that whole creating of what they want. So self-service, again, in creation and consumption. Yes.
You mentioned that in a lot of cases, the data we're looking for is the same. Everybody's looking for the same data.
Yeah.
And I appreciate Kent School District being on top of this. I work at a very small district. I wear many, many hats. Is there any state leadership coming on this? I mean, if we're all looking at the same data, wouldn't we all benefit from some common tools provided by the state?
So OSBI has been working on this, and they've actually been working in, are you in Washington? Or yeah, OSBI has been working on this in their, trying to redo what the report card looks like and some of these other pieces, and they're actually working in Tableau Server. So I personally worked with some of the people on that team at times just to kind of talk through what that could look like as part of our system. And so we're working on that. But as far as state leadership, I think the challenge that they have is that everyone's doing this a little bit differently. And part of it is standardizing on what the urgency is or what the, what the overall case is. But we're really pushing for that. The best thing to do would probably create cohorts of people that you know, like we can connect and we can talk through, yeah, what does that look like in your system? And I'm always willing to talk to anyone about this work and to talk about where they're at and how to figure out how they can create some change where they're at. But again, from the state's perspective, and at least from what they've told me, is that everyone's doing it differently. So all we can really do is, there's some basic things that every school district needs. And those are the things that they're trying to work on. But I've seen what they've done, and it's starting to get there, but it's not fully there.
And they used to, Skyward used to have dashboards and stuff. I remember they still do up front, but they were so unusable. Is that?
Okay, yeah. I know, that's what I'm trying to do, trying to get evidence that we've talked about this.
But they have some built-in dashboards that they're really not very useful. I look at what the other vendors are doing and far more useful. I would just love it if I, as a small district, didn't also have to get my mind around a comprehensive data management solution in addition to getting my wireless to work and my computer problems and the fact that I have to use student discipline and whatever else. I would love the state to be able to help us by just providing us with those tools if we really do have the same kind of common questions.
Yeah, no, I understand. And so I'm going to take that and when I have the next conversation with them, help them to understand what the need is. Because again, I agree with you. Because I feel like there's some things that I would like to do that are community facing that I wish that the state would just put together. And then we can just, put it out there. But we're going to work on that too. Yeah. Yep, we're going to work. We're actually working on that as a system. Yes.
So you have about 25,000 students, right?
Yeah, 26,540, yes.
What size is your team?
My data team or?
The team that does this work. Data analysts, architects.
3, or 2 actually.
2?
Mm-hmm. 2. And I kind of use them centrally, so they interface with all the teams, which helps me to justify having 2, right? Because they work with HR, they work with our operations team, they work with teaching and learning. So they treat them almost like their data analysts, and I use them to train people that are in these groups to, shave maybe a 0.05 off their time to say, hey, let me teach you how to use the data system, so that we have people embedded in each one of the groups who can kind of grow the use. So yeah, it's leveraging, it's kind of crowdsourcing is what I'm really trying to do, but in this really informal way, so that people don't turn it into a thing.
Okay.
Because once it's a thing, then you start to lose control, and it turns into a, well, why aren't you paying these people more? And you're like, but this is kind of our work, so it's just another thing, yeah. Yes?
So I guess getting back to the things probably kind of going off the question up front, was you've been talking about kind of inquiry and that process of kind of directing or teasing out of the end users, right, what they're trying to get at. And I was just kind of wondering if you have a kind of an end-to-end process, how do you keep what are your key performance indicators or whatever you're trying to push as a district and keep people in line with that? Because if they're down there at the bottom being like, oh, wow, I have some access to some attendance stuff and I have some behavior stuff and I'm going to throw them all together and this is what I think is important, where the district is in some sense kind of saying, hey, this is what we think is important.
Yeah. So it's what's funny? So I put this together, right? Anticipating, hoping that someone answered the question, so I'm going to Venmo you something later. So let's walk through this. This is what most data requests look like. I would like attendance data, right? You ask period or full day. Oh, wait, we want both, right? So request a field. And they say, can I have grade level included? Okay, request refilled, right? Then, can you aggregate this by month, include a percentage? And then we're like, really? And this is kind of what the process looks like in a lot of systems, right? So to combat that, and I'm really glad you asked this question because I included this slide just in case I had time. So this is what we do. We do this thing called user stories, right? So for our users, we walk them through this process. And I've really been, again, I use the word socializing. This just means that I use it one by one so that they can talk to each other about it. As a role, I would like to see blah, so that expected outcome. So as an example, as a human resources specialist, I would like to see staff counts by race and tenure so that we can work on retention strategies. If we walk through it this way, we have, this is who the person is, which helps you to frame, right, what kind of questions they're asking. They would like to see staff counts by race and tenure. This tells you how data literate they are. Because if they're asking for, they want to see it by something that really doesn't exist in the system, this tells you whether or not you need to go through some process review or, where they stand so that we can work on retention strategies. So you know who they are, what data they're asking for, and then what they expect. If you use this model, what you end up having is this library of these that says that these are the kind of questions that someone in this role asks. Do we have something that answers this question? You build this catalog of these. Then you have these dashboards with these types of questions in there that start to answer. Then you start to lose that because what ends up happening is someone asks you a question and they're trying to mix all that data. Say, what question are you trying to answer? This? Oh yeah, we already have that. That's over here.
And I guess that's why I was wondering about unleashing all of that data that isn't necessarily directed or
Yep, this allows you to tame that data that's unleashable. Right? So again, I think we're at time. So that's my stuff. AdTech Techniques, me at Twitter. That's me at LinkedIn, I think. And then this is, so I also help lead the Western Washington Tableau K-12 users group. So if any of you are in that kind of area and want to come to something, I think we have something in June. Reach out to me and I can tell you exactly where it is, but the one in June is actually at the Tableau headquarters. We'll have people showing off dashboards, talking about best practices, that type of thing. And we're really trying to create this cohort so that, one, we can influence Tableau in some ways because they don't pay enough attention to education, but two, so that we can help each other come up with best practices on how to do everything in this data work. So thank you all for being here.